Welcome to the video for Chapter 12 of the Cambridge Introduction to Sanskrit, which is going to tell you about the imperfect indicative and the present potential. It might seem a little odd to combine these two, given that they don't really have anything to do with each other. The imperfect tense refers to things in the past. So, for example, in the present tense, I might say I do, whereas in the imperfect, I would say I did. The potential mood, on the other hand, refers to things as potential or as possible. So, for example, in the indicative, I might say I do, whereas in the potential, I might say I might do, could do, should do, ought to do, and so on. However, these two things, the imperfect tense and the potential mood, are here combined not because of their semantic similarities, of which there aren't any, but they are combined because of formal similarities, namely they use the same endings. So let's take a look at those forms. Here in this table we have combined the imperfect indicative and the present potential. If you look at the double column for the singular, on the left there's the forms for the imperfect. Aparam, aparach, aparat for the first, second and third persons. What you see here is forms that all begin with a. This a added to the beginning of a word is the so-called augment, and this marks a form as referring to the past, as being a past tense. And if you've ever done any Greek, then yes, this augment a is exactly related to the augment e in Greek, which has the exact same function, marking something as past tense. This a is then followed by para, which is exactly the same stem that we also find in the present tense. So a plus para. And then we get the new element, which is our new endings. And those are m, ch, and t. These might look, or I hope these will look, vaguely familiar, because actually they are the same endings as what you find in the present, minus the final vowel e. So instead of mi, si, ti, we have m, s, and t, or rather, word final s always changes into visarga, so we don't have m, s, t, we have m, visarga, t. Let's look at the potential singular. Here we have pareyam, parech, pareit. Let's ignore the first singular for the time being, we'll come back to that, and let's look at parech and pareit. What we have here is no a, no past tense marker, because this is not a past tense. And then we have pare. This is our stem, para, same stem as in the present tense, again. But instead of a final a, we have a final e. This e is the potential marker, basically in the same way as the a is the past tense, the imperfect marker. So we have para, where the stem final vowel is changed into e, pare. And then we have our endings that we have already seen in the imperfect, namely visarga and t. If we continue to the dual, we there see that we have, again in the imperfect, all the forms beginning with a, the past tense marker. Then we have the exact same stem as in the present, para, para, para. And then we have our new endings for the imperfect, namely wa, tam, and tam. When we continue to the potential, we see that again we have no augment, because there's no need for a past marker. This is not a past form. But instead we once again have the same stem as in the present indicative, namely para, but with its final vowel changed into an e, so pare, marking the potential. And then we have the exact same endings as we just saw in the imperfect, namely wa, tam, and tam. When we continue to the plural, we see in the imperfect, again, our augment a at the beginning, then exactly the same stem as in the present, para, 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 and our new imperfect endings, namely ma, ta, and n. Continuing on to the potential, we again have our stem para changed into pare, with e being the potential marker, plus endings that we've just seen in the imperfect, namely pare ma, pare ta. And then actually we have not paren, which we might expect, but we have an alternative ending, pare yuch. And it's this yuch at the end of the third person plural form, and this e yam at the end of the first person singular form that are basically the two irregularities between these two paradigms. Other than that, you use the same stem. In the case of the imperfect, you use the stem plus an a at the beginning. In the case of the potential, you use the stem but with the final vowel, not an a but an e, and then you add the exact same endings. The exception to this last bit is that first singular and third plural don't have the same endings, but in the case of first singular, we've got similar endings, and yam, and in the third person plural, we have completely different endings. So in a nutshell, both imperfect indicative and present potential use the same stem as the present tense, as the present indicative that we've already seen, namely para. The imperfect uses the augment a in front of the stem. The potential changes the end of the stem from a to e, and then they use more or less the same endings. As always, when we come across a set of new forms, the question arises how to best memorize those forms. And there are some people who prefer memorizing a whole paradigm. So, for example, going abharam, abharach, abharat, abharawa, abharatam, abharatam, and so on. Others prefer memorizing just the new endings. So, for example, am, cht, watam, tam, mata, an, uch, or am, visargate, watam, tam, mata, an, uch. Basically, you should do whichever one works better for you. But whichever of these methods you choose, it may be helpful to notice or to remember that there are certain patterns that you can see. So, for example, in the singular endings, we have the pattern of MST in underlyingly or indirectly in all three of present indicative, present potential, and past indicative. Namely, in the present indicative, we have ami, asi, ati. In the imperfect indicative, we have am, as, at. And in the potential, we have eam, es, et. But this pattern is made less obvious by the sandhi change of word final s into visarga. Still, maybe you'll find it helpful. Another pattern that you can find is that in the first person dual and the first person plural, we always have wa and ma. Namely, in the present indicative, we have wach and mach. In the imperfect indicative, we have wa and ma. And in the potential, we again have wa and ma just preceded by e, so ewa and ema. Finally, two notes on the augment. Now the augment, the a that is added at the beginning of an imperfect form to mark this form as referring to the past, is placed not at the beginning of the word as a whole, but it's placed right in front of the verbal root, meaning that if there are any preverbs, this augment comes after the preverbs. So, for example, present prati gacchati, he returns, gives us an imperfect prati a gachat, that then sandhis into pratya gachat. Again, if you know Greek, then yes, this is exactly the same as would be happening in Greek. Secondly, verbs beginning with a vowel are augmented by putting that initial vowel into vritti. So, for example, of the present tense ichati, he wants, we get an imperfect aichat, where I, the initial I in aichat, is the vritti of I. We've got zero grade I, guna e, vritti I, and so it's this vritti of the initial vowel that we find in the imperfect or in any verb form that is augmented. That was it for this chapter. We hope that you found this video helpful, and if you have any comments or suggestions, we would love to hear from you. Please do write to us at rupal@cambridge-sanskrit.org. And now, for your own work on this material, good luck and have fun!